My name is Mike Coleman. I'm in the desktop team at VMware. I've been there, by way of introduction, I've been there about 2.5 years working on enterprise desktop technologies. Prior to that, I was with Intel, where I did virtualization solutions with the white box channel, so helping white box server vendors certify their platforms for VMware and XenServer at the time, and some of those things. And then before that, I spent, oh wait, hold on. There you go, take it again. No. Before that, I spent about 7 years at Microsoft on the Windows product marketing team, and I shipped, on this part of that team, I shipped 3 or 4 versions of Windows. I started with Windows 98. I'm sorry. Then we went on to Windows 98 Second Edition. I'm even more sorry. Then we did Windows 2000 and Windows XP, and then they said, hey, we're going to ship Vista. You should stick around. I said, yeah, you are. And I left, and then 2 years later, they shipped it. And that's why, because I left. Had I stayed, it would have shipped sooner, I'm sure. Prior to that, I spent about 13 years as an IT administrator. So if the long hair doesn't get me enough like tech cred, anybody know what Banyan Vines was? So, I was a certified Banyan engineer. Yeah, rock on. And I was a Novell NetWare certified engineer at the same time. So so I did servers and desktops, and my very first job out of high school was loading AST 286 PCs. Actually, I think we started with 8086 PCs that had a turbo switch on them. Right? You could take them from 4 megahertz to 12 megahertz. Anybody remember those? Anyway, yeah, they were powerful stuff. And then you could take your RLL drives or MFM drives and reformat them with RLL and get an extra, I don't know what it was, 1 megabyte of storage on them or something. They were 10 meg drives. So I go back a ways with desktops. Anyway, what we're coming here today is to talk a little bit about, sort of desktop virtualization and where we're going forward. And I will say right now that it is the end of a long week. And you may not learn the most in this session, but my goal is to make you the most entertained. So when you come out of here, hopefully this will be the most entertaining session you've been in. And you may think, wow, that was light on content, but heavy on jokes. So, I set the bar pretty low for myself. I clearly can't use the clicker, so I'll do this thing here. Yeah, if you haven't been in a session, you've seen this thing, and whatever. All right, I think I stole this line from Citrix, so we'll just skip right through that. All right, so some of you may have seen this slide, but let's just set up this discussion about why we're even here and talking about desktop. So as I mentioned, I joined VMware a couple years ago, and I was really happy. Intel's a great company. It was actually the second time I'd worked there, and I was having a good time, and a friend of mine called me up and he said, hey, you come talk to us about desktops. I want to talk to you about what we're doing. And when I heard this idea of desktop virtualization, or VDI as we were calling it back then, I was like, this is the first time in a long time where I think we've got a technology that can really start solving some serious problems. Because the same problems that we were having with the introduction of Windows 3.1, are you going to check my battery for me? I don't know what it is. It's probably not the battery, it's probably me. I probably can't use my fingers correctly. This idea of DLL conflicts and this battle between, see, I told you, there's an on-off switch, I'm sure, right? I don't know, okay. So at the end of what, am I doing it wrong again? So this battle between the IT organization and the end user and the conflicts that come from that, right? How many of you have, I'm going to steal a joke from the super session. How many of you were in the super session? Okay, laugh anyway when you hear this joke. How many of you have an iPad? How many of you want an iPad? There you go. That's what I thought. You come in and I think about this cloud journey that they've talked about and that Victoria was talking about. And he mentioned email in there, and that's sort of where I draw this desktop journey in thank you very much. And I parallel it with email. So we were talking about the early days of the internet and some of that stuff. And after I got off of Pine or whatever my email reader was in my Unix systems, I got Eudora, right? Everybody, Eudora POP3 email. That's how you got your email from your ISP back in the day. And for those of you who didn't do that, you basically had a PC and it would download the email off the server and it would sit on the machine, right? And if you try to set POP3 up on multiple machines, it was kind of a pain because it didn't have this idea of synchronization. You either downloaded it or you didn't. And so if you pulled it off the server, it wasn't there anymore. It only lived right here. Right? So then we said, all right, someone said, hey, we got this thing called the internets, and we got this thing called the World Wide Webs, and we're going to use that to do email. And so they got this really cool idea, and they called it Hotmail, right? Or whatever the mail of the du jour was. And they said, we're going to put all the email up on the server. We're going to put it all up there on the internet, and everybody's going to be able to get to it wherever they want. But you could only get to it if you were connected, right? There was, early on, there was no way to take that email with you. So we talk about traditional VDI, and we say, okay, well, you're connected, you can get it. Then somebody came up with, there was IMAP for the Exchange server, but the consumerization was really when you started seeing services like Gmail, right, and Hotmail and some of these other services, allowing me to take my mail with me and leave it up there and not have to think about it. So if you've got a Gmail account, and I only use Gmail because that's where my email is, it doesn't matter if I'm on my iPad or if I'm using Exchange or if I'm using a web browser or whatever, it's the exact same experience, right? Maybe not the exact same experience, but the exact same information, and I get it the same way. And that's the vision, right, that we're trying to get from this area where there's this the end user feels like they're at home, and when they're at home, they can use whatever phone they want, they can use whatever PC they want, they can have whatever application they want, and then they go in the office, and you can't do that for them because it's just too ridiculously difficult to support every permutation, right? So as we, talk about how do you get that sort of level of responsiveness and interactivity into the IT user's hands, right? But still maintain the things that you are in charge of and the things that matter to you as IT professionals, right? How do you deal with Sarbanes-Oxley or HIPAA, or how do you make sure that you have responsiveness and be able to respond back to customers when there's problems? And how do you prevent them from happening in the first place? How do you deliver a Gmail-like experience where the person has the choice of every device out there, but be able to get, control around that and maintain the stuff that you care about? And that's sort of this idea of, we talk about the consumer cloud experience for the enterprise, bringing the best of both worlds into the space. So it sort of starts, right, with, sort of this desktop virtual machine, and we talk about, the very first step and the step that some people took. So how many of you have deployed a desktop virtualization VDI sort of in your environment today? So a few of you, right? How many of you are just sort of learning about it and looking at the first steps of that journey, right? So and it's funny. It's kind of funny because this is the second time I've done the session, and the first time I did it, it was actually reversed. And so I was like, I'm one of these people that had deployed it already, why they were in the session. But so, the first step is to just take the operating system and get it into the data center, right, and access it remotely. And even with that, you start accruing immediate benefits, right? You get secured computing, and your data is protected, and you've got reduced support, less break fix. Some of these things happen, but then you've got to start moving it up, and you realize something that I realized a long time ago. It's about the application, stupid. Right? I mean, that's what I learned from customers when I was at Microsoft. When I was doing a focus group, and I don't know if you've ever done this, but this is where you sit in a room and they give you lots of food, and then you stare at a two-way mirror and you watch people get asked questions. And we were sitting there with a group of people, and we were probably in middle America somewhere. We may have been like Davenport, Iowa, and these were just regular PC users that we had recruited. And what we were trying to figure out was how do you get people excited and invested in the Windows brand is what we were trying to figure out, because we saw this affinity towards Apple. And we were like, so how do we get people to build a relationship with Windows so they love it? And we said, okay, first we got to understand, how do they feel about their operating system? And we sat down with these people, and we had these moderators, and they were like, so tell me what version of Windows you run. And the folks would look at us and they go, I use Excel 97, right? No, Windows. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, I use Word. Right, and it was like these people had no concept of the operating system. Right, the operating system is something that allows them to get their job done. So as you start moving up into the next layer, it's about what are the applications and how do you get them, and how do you you've seen the stuff about Horizon, but how do you move into that space and go and applications are available, whether they're software as a service, whether they're traditional Windows 32 applications, whether they're next gen applications that we haven't even thought of yet, and then finally, how do you make it about the user and not the device? How do you make it not about a monolithic centralized PC, but really this user just can float through this nirvana cloud that I don't know. I can't get too ethereal. I'm a pretty grounded person. So that third stage, a little bit weird for me. It makes me think of the Cairo from Microsoft years and years ago and those file systems. So anyway, what we're here to talk about though today is really that first step of that journey, right? It is sort of centralizing and virtualizing their desktop operating systems, and what do you need to consider? And so, kind of four or five criteria that I look at is sort of, do you have a system that you can trust, right? Are you buying from a vendor that has been doing this for a while? Do you have a system that's inherently built to scale out and handle what it takes? And we'll talk about this a little bit later, but I mean, obviously, the scale of desktop virtualization dwarfs the scale of server virtualization. It's just an order of magnitude greater, just in sheer numbers. And then in complexity, it's always funny because as a desktop guy, I don't know, how many of you in here are desktop people? How many of you are server people? Are you different kinds of people? I think you are. Maybe I just felt this way. As a desktop person, I always felt the server people would be like, you and your toy operating system, right? You and your Windows PCs. Excuse me, I have to go tune my RS6000, right? Or whatever they're working on. But at the end of the day, it's been my finding that the desktop operating environment is extremely complex. It's not easy, right? It's a tough job to manage that environment. So if you're going to deploy and manage a system to do it, you've got to have one that can scale and that can handle that. And then flexibility. And people often say, and I don't disagree with this on some level, at least the way we used to look at it, is that, VMware, you're a server company, you don't get the desktop. Well, we've hired some really smart desktop people that have pretty extensive desktop backgrounds, right? And the fact of the matter is there's no one solution to this problem, right? There's just not. You don't come in and say, I get emails from my sales rep, something like, I had an 80,000 seat VDI opportunity. No, you don't, right? You don't. There's different ways of attacking the problem. And in some cases, that is terminal server. And sometimes that's physical PCs. In other cases, it's local mode, virtual machines on disconnected workers or on laptops. In some cases, it's traditional, what we call traditional VDI. And sometimes in traditional VDI, there's 4 or 5 different ways to do it, right? So you've got to have a solution that can take you through the spectrum of those options and that also integrates what you already have in your environment, right? I'm not one of those VMware people that's going to stand up there and tell you that VMware View is going to replace your Citrix presentation server environment, right? They're different things, potentially, different utilizations. But can you make those things work together? Absolutely, 100%. So, and then how much is it going to cost you? Are you going to make your money back? How much is it going to cost you to get it in the door, and how much are you going to save going forward? Because at the end of the day, we're all in business. We got to make money. And it doesn't do anybody any good to deploy technology for the sake of deploying technology. All right, so production proven. So this is that slide. So I just changed titles. I'm now a product line manager, and I don't know what that means, but that's my title. I used to be a technical marketing manager. This slide was written by somebody who had marketing manager in their name, but they were not technical. You know what I'm saying? Okay. But at the end of the day, I do want to point some things out, right? So we have been working in virtualizing desktop operating systems for a long time. Now, is workstation the same thing as desktop as VDI? Absolutely not. But it's a foundation of understanding how to optimize operating systems, how to tune them for scale, and how to deploy them out in a virtual environment, right? ESX, of course, where most of our customers came from early. And then we started moving out. We're the first company to offer a server-hosted virtual desktop VDI product to the market in 2006. And then from there, we've consistently delivered year after year innovation in this space, right? So with the introduction of the PC over IP protocol, the View client with local mode with View 4.5, tiered storage for desktop virtualization environments, these sort of innovations. So we'll continue to innovate in this space. If you were in the super session, you heard about our vision longer term and some of the areas that we're marching into. Right, and we've got good customer success behind us. We've got a good number of customers. We have a huge channel and partners helping to deploy and sell these solutions. And then we have an ecosystem that's sort of built around all of this. And the ecosystem point, to me, goes back to what I was saying a couple minutes ago, which was you can't walk into an environment and say that we are standalone, we're all things to all people. How do you integrate with my storage vendor? How do you integrate with my choice of thin clients? How do you integrate with my choice of compute server vendors? How do you integrate with my existing, application delivery mechanisms? How's all that stuff going to fit together? So that's sort of that last bullet. So how do you build and deploy as a managed service? So for those of you who aren't familiar with View, and there's a bunch of you that said, hey, we're kind of in here, and this is our first step on the journey, this is the slide where I'm going to show you a little bit about the pieces that make up View. We're going to start at the back end. So we have VMware vSphere for Desktops is what it's called when it's sold with View. It's vSphere Enterprise Plus. That comes. And you can buy View 2 different ways. You can buy VMware View with the vCenter vSphere components, or you can buy VMware View without it, and that assumes you already have the virtualization infrastructure running in your environment. So in either case, the back end is vSphere for desktops. And that's where we're going to run your Windows XP, Windows 7 desktops in there. And then sort of in the middle, you have the management layer. So what takes care of all of this stuff, right? So of course, there's a vCenter server out there. On the vCenter server, that's where we run our View Composer technology. What View Composer is, and I'll spend a little bit more time on this in another slide, is basically it does three things for you. It drastically reduces the cost of storage by using software to share virtual images. It speeds the provisioning process by not requiring you to do a full clone replication for every desktop in your environment. And it makes patching and updating and managing your environment exponentially simpler because you're using a single base image for all your users. I have slides on View Composer, so I'll spend more time on it there. Also there is VMware ThinApp. ThinApp is our application virtualization technology. It allows you to take applications that, typically you install an application, you write DLLs into the file system and registry keys and all this stuff. What we do is we take that application and we run a capture process on it. And we encapsulate all of that application information into a single, what we call a sandbox. And that allows that application to execute in a virtualized environment on top of an operating system. So a couple of really key use cases for this. One is down-revved operating systems. So the demo I did today, right, running IE6 inside of Windows 7. You create this package, and that package can run on a USB key. It can run installed into a local machine, either physical or virtual. It can be streamed over the network. Right, so that's what the ThinApp technology does, and that comes with one of the versions of VMware View you can buy. And then in the middle is the View Manager. And View Manager is sort of the workhorse. It's commonly referred to as a connection broker, but it's so much more. It does do connection brokering, which is the concept of I've got to get this user to the right desktop. So a user logs in with their Active Directory credentials, and we redirect them to the right desktop. Be that we can broker back to physical PCs, we can broker back to terminal server sessions, and we can broker back to hosted virtual desktops. You put our agent on a physical PC or a Blade PC, you can put our agent in a terminal server, and you can put our agent in a virtual machine, and we can broker back connections to all those. Are we the greatest broker for terminal services? No, but you can definitely do it, right? Talked about View Composer and ThinApp. The View Manager, so it handles the security entitlements for users. So not only does it redirect them to the right desktop and make sure that you can get to the right desktop, provides you a one-shot view into the health of the environment with the dashboard view, allows you to create, edit, delete, manage desktop pools, and allows you to provision ThinApps into those pools. So you can take a collection of applications that you virtualize with ThinApp, import them into the View Manager, and then assign those applications to different pools. So this is a new feature in 4.5. Today it's pool-based. In the future, we'll look to making it more user-based, more desktop-based, more granular, but today it's based on the membership in the pool. And then finally, out on the front end, we support a wide range of clients, everything from true zero clients with nothing on them but our software to boot up and go find the View server and do a lot of stuff, all the way up to very capable thin clients with embedded operating systems from either Windows XP embedded or WTOS or whatever that is, from a wide range of vendors to repurposed PCs. We just released a native Mac client for VMware View, and we are showing a prototype. Well, it's not a prototype; it's an early version of our PC over IP based client for the iPad. So, and we're working on Android and all that. So the full range of devices, and it's not just about can you connect to that device? It's about, what's that user experience like when you get there? So with PC over IP, being able to bring in things like virtualized printing, multimedia redirection, USB redirection, multi-monitor display, like true multi-monitor display, right? So I have 4 monitors, 2500 by 1600 resolution, and being able to do them in T's and L's and U's and whatever configuration. Who has 4 monitors in here? Anybody? I want to work for you. You have 8, don't you? Just 4, okay. All right, so vSphere for desktops. I'm not going to spend obviously I didn't update this slide. I didn't get the memo that apparently from when I wrote this slide 2 weeks ago to today, we've added 50,000 customers. It's been a busy 2 weeks for VMware because I think the number is 190,000 now. But what we've done is in this we're going to talk a little bit about scalability from the hosting side, but we're all here today because of the success of what we've done in server virtualization. I mean, that really is what has fueled the growth of not only VMware, but an entire industry and ecosystem around it. And at the center of that is the vSphere platform. And one of the things that we've done, though, in the last couple of versions is we've gone to the vSphere team. We've said, look, let's talk about what it takes to manage desktops. How many of you today in your environment with vSphere and vCenter are managing 500 servers, 500 virtual machines? How many of you are doing over 1,000? Anybody? 2,000? Anyone? I think the highest I had a guy with about 3,500. He had 3,500 virtual servers that he was running in his environment. That is impressive, right? I mean, by any imagination. So now, I work for Coca-Cola, and you come to me and you say, I'm going to virtualize 3,500 of your desktops. And I say to you, congratulations, you virtualized 1.5% of my user population, right? I mean, these large enterprises can have hundreds of thousands of desktops. So what we've been doing with the vSphere and the vCenter team is saying, how do you manage 10,000 virtual machines, right, in a single vCenter instance? How do you double the cluster size? How do you make it so we can start talking about massive scale as we have customers now moving from 5 to 10 to 20,000 virtual desktops deployed with View? So there's a slide, and let me explain to you what this slide is. So a while back, Citrix put out a white paper, and what they did is they used the Login VSI tool, and they ran it on it was a Dell R710 with that sort of the high-end Nehalem processors when they came out earlier this year, and I think they had 72 gigs of RAM. And we were curious. We said, okay, so what if we did the same test on the same hardware? And the problem was I didn't have the same hardware. I had Nehalem-based processors that were actually the lower end, so there was like 4 versions in the family, and we had like the 2 2s, and they were using the 3 6s, I think, or something like that. The exact details are online. You can read about them. And we had less. Actually, no. We had one server with slower processors and more RAM. We had one machine with the same processors and less RAM. And we ran the same login consultant script on those processes. We tried to follow the process exactly the same. And this is what we came up with. On these machines that, this was the machine that actually had the slower processors, or the same processors, less RAM. And we basically found that we were going to be about 19% more efficient on managing that. And a lot of that comes from the use of the memory over commit technology and being able to scale that out. But some of it's just on CPU and other things. If you're not familiar with the Login Consultants tool, the way it works is it basically automates Word, Excel, PowerPoint, Adobe Flash, Internet Explorer, and it runs through a series of cycles. It's done by a company in, I think they're in the Netherlands. They're somewhere in the Nordic region over in Europe, and it's free. They have 2 versions. There's a free version and an expensive version. Well, I shouldn't say it's expensive. There's a free version and a version you pay for. I'm sure that the value is worth the money. Is Ruben in here? I don't think he is. I think it's kind of expensive. That's why I didn't buy it. So I used the free version, and basically, so this sort of goes up. Now, I mean, there's probably some people in the room that are going, well, yeah, but can't you run the Citrix solution on vSphere? Well, absolutely. We're going to talk about a little bit about that as we go forward. You can do that, but at the end of the day, with VMware View, with our platform, these are the numbers. And some people will say, well, is that all up? I mean, can't you do more in a Citrix environment? Yeah, absolutely. You can put up provisioning servers, and you can do some other stuff that we don't have a provisioning server, or excuse me, a presentation server, XenApp-like tool. But we're not talking about that here. We're talking about what's it take to deploy desktops, right? And then we'll talk about how do you get applications into that in a little bit. And then if you go up and you say, all right, and this slide, there's a lot of talk about vSphere versus XenServer, and this slide may actually need to be updated. I don't know. But the point being isn't so much about what we do versus what XenServer does. It's about what do you need from a virtualization solution for your desktop. So some people say, I don't really care. I don't need DRS, or I don't need whatever functionality or feature. The memory density is really nice, right? But do I need DRS? So let me talk a little bit about some of those functionalities. So if you talk about something like DRS, which is dynamic resource scheduling, it's the ability for VMs or servers to be able to dynamically adjust where the workloads run. at runtime. If you think about it from a desktop perspective, and you've now deployed 10,000 desktops, and let's say you're doing that and you can get 100 desktops per server, that means you have 100 servers running it, or 10, I don't know, I can't do the math, whatever, you got a lot of damn servers running it. Oh, I said damn, I'm sorry. So you got all these servers running it. If you set that up and you sort of place all those servers on day one, what are the chances that on day 52 those servers are optimally loaded? Right? 0 to none. So with DRS and stuff like that, we can kind of manage that process for you in the background and make sure that the optimal use of resources happens automatically. And that's sort of when you start talking about, well, why does the platform matter? Right? So choosing the right platform and moving forward in that is an important concept. And some of the features of vSphere are what make that so. All right, so PC over IP. Let's talk a little bit about PC over IP. And sort of the desktop experience. Early on, we ran solely on RDP, right? And we realized that in certain experiences, in certain cases, we were experience challenged, right? Did pretty well on the LAN, on the wide area network, not so much. So we worked with the company Teradici out of Canada, and we are in a joint development agreement with them, and we've developed the PC over IP protocol for View. And in this case, PC over IP for View, at its most basic level, is a software-to-software implementation. So it's all done in software. You can add hardware components for either specialized use cases or if you want to offload some of the processing on your server. But at the end of the day, like all the demos we've shown here with View in the show, those have been the software-based version. So what we got with that was some really important stuff. True multi-mon was a big win for us, and being able to handle the monitor configurations I talked about. We had USB and multimedia redirection for a long time, right? We've had that since View, I think 2.1 actually. So those weren't new, but all of this is going back to driving like a seamless user experience. So whether or not you are using productivity applications, or if you're using multimedia and graphics, do we have work to do in this space? Absolutely, right? I mean, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that this is the be-all, end-all, greatest protocol ever written, but I will tell you what other people have said. Network World did a review of VMware View 4, right, and compared it against other offerings on the market and said that we won, right? That View 4, and so nobody's done a review on 4.5 yet because it's not out yet. It'll be out. I can say it'll be out next week. So people are like, when's View 4 going to ship? Next week. Vittorio said it this morning. He's my boss's boss, so if he says it's okay to say it, I'll say it. It'll be out next week sometime. But on the View 4, they said, hey, you won. And the quote was that they found PC over IP to be unbeatable in their tests. That was their words, not mine. Brian Madden, when he looked at PC over IP, he said, you know what? I was surprised at how well it did on the LAN and the WAN, and that it easily passed the good enough test. Now, good enough is it's not like a gold medal, but I'll take it when you come from RDP, right? So we've got customers out there that have put us up against other competitors in the market. They've tested us, and they've chosen us for both local and wide area network deployment. And we're really happy with the work we're doing. But we're not stopping, right? We continue to work. We continue to invest in new client form factors and new optimizations. We've worked with our customers to understand, one of the things about PC over IP that sort of makes it unique is the way it treats the network and the way it treats the display. PC over IP is going to, by default, work to build to a lossless state, which means we're going to do a full fidelity image. Other protocols on the market, there's many of them, will go and build themselves into a lossy state, right? And a lossy state is going to give you better efficiency on the network. A lossless state is going to give you better quality. The problem is not everybody wants to pay the price, which is bandwidth, that it takes to get to full lossless. So we've worked to provide some administrative templates and some GPO settings where you can set the quality threshold that you want. You can set the bandwidth thresholds that you want, so you can more fine-tune PC over IP to operate in the environment so you can make some more choices and have a little more control around that. So local mode. Look at this animation. Dude, that was so sweet. Look at that. See the way it comes down the wire even? Like it's on the network? Get that part? Anyway. Again, it's our marketing team at work. I'm easily entertained. The only thing I have on my iPad is Angry Birds. That's all I need. So this is technology that we've had in tech preview for a while, and we're now shipping it with View 4.5, and it's called View with local mode. And This is a Type 2 hypervisor solution, and I'll give you, my feeling on Type 2 versus Type 1. But let's talk about what this technology is first. It allows you to take the same virtual desktop image that you're providing to people for remote access and bring it down locally. So you don't create a special image. You don't have to have like, oh, these are my local mode images, and these are my, what we'll call remote images. It's the same image, right? There's certain types of desktops that can't be taken offline. You have to have a desktop that's assigned to somebody and some other stuff, but it's the same image in that pool. That pool can be mixed and matched with local and remote users. And what we've done is we've wrapped security around that so that we bring it down and it executes on the end node device, so a laptop or a desktop, and it does so in a way that's secured. So we encrypt the virtual machine, and we also set in policies so that we heartbeat back to the data center. So if somebody has a laptop and they've got the image on it and their laptop is absconded, isn't that a great word? Someone absconds with their laptop. The VM will eventually time out. As an administrator, you can also time a VM out, and the next time somebody checks in, it'll shut the VM down. So it's like a poison pill. So they can't access it anymore. The check-in, check-out process is done in a way that when you get back to the network, so you've got your machine, you've got the image loaded, and it's time for me to head off to VMworld. I check it out, I work on the airplane, I work here, and then I connect back up. And as a user, you can choose when you replicate back up if your administrator allows it. Your administrator can control all of that, whether or not you can check in, whether or not you can check out, whether or not, these sort of things. So I go to check back in, I'm just going to replicate up, watch it, wait for it. Oh, I went backwards, so we get to watch this again. That was almost as good as last night's episode of Big Brother. All right. Oh, just the changes get replicated back up. Block level changes. So we're not gonna do the whole image back and forth. We're gonna do block level changes back and forth. So that's sort of what local mode does. Now, people will say, well, that's a Type 2 hypervisor. Don't you have to have an operating system running underneath that? I mean, isn't that like a pain in the keister? Yeah. Well, there are advantages and disadvantages to Type 1 versus Type 2 hypervisors. We were working on a Type 1 hypervisor, and we were talking to customers about it, and they said, "Wait a minute, how does that work?" We're like, "Well, you get the latest laptop from so and so, right? Whoever," and they're like, "So it's latest generation hardware," and we're like, "Yeah," and they're like, "Okay," and then you wipe that machine out and you put a Type 1 hypervisor on it. They said, "Well, that doesn't. We want to be able to use our existing laptops, right? And we want to be able to use all of them." So with a Type 2 hypervisor, you have to have if you have the horsepower to run that operating system natively, then you can run it in a virtual machine. And there's, I'm not going to tell you there's no performance hit, but the performance hit's negligible to be in the Type 2 machine. Now, the trade-off there is, so the other part of it is the scenarios that they wanted to enable were things like if you're a contractor or you have contractors working for you, somebody comes in with their laptop and says, "Here's my laptop, I need access to your environment." And you say, "Well, I'm going to give you a secured, managed virtual machine to do that." But I'm going to have to, in the case of Type 1, I'm going to have to wipe that machine out if the hypervisor's not already on the machine, right? I'm going to have to wipe that out and put the hypervisor on it. And they're like, "Well, no, I don't want you to do that, right? I want to maintain my environment, and I want access to your environment." The trade-off is, yes, there's an underlying operating system there that you have to be considerate about, right? And as we move forward, we start talking about, not today, but in the future, we talk about things like how do you qualify the end node to make sure those end nodes are secured and in the right state to be able to execute your environments. So, it's not about one size fits all. It's about what's the right technology for task workers, knowledge workers, power users, mobile users. I'll tell you a true story, right? Guy calls me up and he says, "I've got people that are deploying desktops using terminal services. They've got 1,000 desktops and how do I get them to move to VMware View?" And I said to them, "Okay, what's the pain point?" He goes, "What do you mean?" I go, "Well, what's the problem you're trying to solve?" He goes, "Well, I'm short on my quota this month." I said, "Okay, aside from your quota, what's the problem you're trying to solve for the customer?" And he said, I go, "Do the applications that they need to run in terminal services?" He goes, "Well, it appears so." And I said, "Do they have a problem with session reliability where, a problem in one desktop would take the whole server down?" He's like, "Not in this case, no." And I'm like, "Okay, well, then that's probably the right technology for that solution." The good news is if you need terminal services for those cases, we can broker back to terminal services, right? So the technology for technology's sake doesn't really work with me. And that's a case where you're choosing the right tool for the environment. So in some cases, it's terminal services. In some cases, it's physical PCs. In some cases, it's high-end blade PCs. And physical PCs, you can deploy managed virtual machines down to those if you want using local mode. Blade PCs, you can broker back to those, either Teradici-based ones, or you can broker back to them using the View agent. We can really work across a wide spectrum of these use cases. Everything from task workers up to mobile users. So deployment and management. So this is the single management console. With VMware View 4.5, we went a long way to really try to, we've always believed that we had a really great management story. And as far as managing your virtual desktops. And we feel like we've made that better with 4.5. So the ability now from a single place to be entitle applications, to be able to handle user data and settings through persistent disks with View Composer, to be able to deploy and manage the operating systems. And from here, you can set up and broker back to all those environments I talked to. So if you're going to do something with Terminal Server, you do it in View Manager. You don't use a different console. And if you don't use a different console for physical PCs, and you don't use a different console for this other stuff, it's all done in the View 4.5. Right? And this is where you manage your policies, right? Again, you don't go into a separate console to manage your policies, and you don't manage some policies here and other policies there. Now, are we 100%, if I'm being completely honest, we do some things through GPO, right? I already mentioned that, so I would be remiss to not, to not own that. But at the end of the day, if you compare us, and again, to our competitor, it's not about, to me, this is not about 15 steps versus 4 steps. I'm not a huge fan of this slide, even though, full disclosure, I wrote it. What I get to with this slide is the idea of a streamlined, well-engineered set of softwares that were designed to kind of work together, versus software that has been put together in a bundle, but still really is a collection of software that sort of operates in individual discrete components. And I believe that's an advantage that we have. And I have Citrix up here, but if I put up the Microsoft RDS slide, it would look almost exactly the same, right? There are other vendors who don't offer, there's other vendors I could put up there and the slide would look very different, but those vendors don't offer the breadth of solution that you can get from, VMware or Citrix or, some of the other, really VMware and Citrix in this case. The reality is, we believe we're going to be faster to deploy. We believe we're going to be easier to manage because this story carries itself right over into this story. And people say, well, I only set up and deploy once, so I don't really care. Once I get through that pain, I don't really care. And I'm like, how many of you have set up an environment and never went back to it ever again? Right? It's not a one-time thing, right? It's an ongoing thing. And this idea of management is an ongoing thing. So in VMware View, single web-based management console versus, as I talked about before, a set of technologies, all of which on their own are pretty solid technologies that just are sort of placed together in this bundle, which their own management experience for each different component and the ability to go through and kind of have to go through and do many different steps. The best way to look at this, if you want to see it in action, is just go to YouTube/VMware View, right, and take a look. There's a couple demos up there. So flexible desktop management. So we're going to talk a little bit about flexible desktop provisioning. So the idea here is, and again, this is something that's really unique to us, is that, let's talk about virtual desktops. For those of you who aren't as familiar as maybe some of the others, there's a lot of different ways to deploy a virtual desktop. The most simple, the most basic way to do it is to deploy full clone desktops, right? You just take a VM and you clone it out, and everybody gets a full virtual machine. Right? That virtual machine may be 10 or 20 or 30 gigabytes in size. That's the easiest to do because it's the most like a real PC. You don't have to worry about, like, what am I going to do with the persona? What am I going to do with the user applications? It may be the easiest to deploy, but it's probably the hardest to eventually manage. So low upfront cost, huge manageability cost. Their Nirvana end state is fully stateless operating system with abstracted user data and abstracted applications so that you can do whatever you want down here and not have to worry about affecting the stuff that matters to the end user. That's like the Nirvana space, right? And all the vendors can kind of sort of get to some place on that spectrum. I don't think anybody really gets to the full nirvana that we want to be at today because there's a problem that we still haven't dealt with as much as we'd like to, and we've shown some technology, but that's user-installed applications. So user-installed applications, great down here. They work, right? Because this is just like kind of a physical PC. If you give them admin privileges, they can do whatever they want. But over here, most vendors ourselves included, don't have a way for someone to install something into the C drive on their own and then have that stick around and survive an update process, right? So that's sort of the spectrum. But the reality is that we can kind of operate across that full spectrum. We can do full clone desktops. We can do these sort of non-persistent stateless desktops. We can do stuff in between where you've got a stateless operating system disk, but we've got a persistent user disk that we oddly enough call the persistent disk that stores stuff in the documents and settings folder, right? So we can move up and down that. And the thing is that we do all of that, again, using the exact same processes to manage and deploy and edit and delete, right? So we believe that gives us a level of flexibility that we don't necessarily see in other solutions. And I think it's something to think about because most people aren't going to go out and deploy one type of desktop. How many of you that have done virtual desktops do View Composer desktops for your users? So we got a couple. How many of you do full clone desktops? Again, that was about 2/3 and 1/3. And so the reason a lot of people do this is they want the storage savings. They want the flexibility, but to get the storage savings, they use like flex cloning technology from NetApp or whatever to kind of do the deduplication, right? And that's a totally viable scenario. So, I already talked about that. So let's talk about that full clone versus link clone technology. So you go out and we call this traditional VDI, but it's still a completely viable model. Most of the people I talk to actually do it this way today using some sort of underlying SAN architecture to help with some of the issues. But in this environment, if you were going to deploy out 100 desktops and they reach 10 gigs, you're going to use a terabyte of storage. And beyond that, what you're going to do is, if you don't do any sort of deduplication or thin provisioning or whatever, beyond that, you have to update every one of those operating system images through some mechanism. Right, you got to have an Altiris or an SMS or a SneakerNet even or whatever it is, and then from there, rolling this out is every cloning operation takes let's say it's 7 minutes, right? And you can do 3 or 4 of them simultaneously, so it's going to take you a long time to roll out 1,000 desktops. So on the other side, with View Composer technology, and this is storage reduction technology that's been around for a while. It uses the snapshot technology in the vSphere platform. We can take a single base image, a master golden image, snapshot that off, and then point many, many desktops to that image and share it. So it basically reduces your storage cost in software alone by about 70%. What we've introduced let me back up a little bit. So the way this really looks at the VMDK level is you can end up with up to 3 different virtual hard drives that get composed into a single operating system for the end user. So you start out with the base read-only operating system disk. We'll call that the OS disk. And then if we all have that same base OS disk, there has to be a way for us to manage what makes that operating system different between all of us. And the most basic level, that's the page file, right? I mean, if you think about it, we're all going to have a different page file. So you've got to have some sort of disk that handles that page file. We call that the replica disk. And then you've got, if you want it, something that we call the persistent disk. We used to call it the user data disk, which takes the documents and settings folder, redirects it out there, so that stays, sort of stateful if you go over here and do something on the base image. So what we've done with View 4.5 is allow you to tier that storage out, so you can place sort of this stateless, I don't care about it, operating system disk that's fully transient, as well as this replica disk on cheap storage. In the case of the operating system disk, that's a full read-only profile, right? That's read-only. Your user data disk, you would have to go and understand what the read-write profile is on that to understand how to optimize your storage. But chances are you need higher performance storage with more redundancy for this data that you care about. But we allow you to choose how you're going to push that storage out. The other thing that's really nice is you can come in and you can update this base image. So it's Patch Tuesday. Right? How many of you deal with Patch Tuesday? All of us, basically, right? At least you know which day of the week to dread. So you come in and you go into Virtual Center and you fire up the VM or however you're going to do it, and you access it and you update the image, put the patches on, shut it down, you snapshot it. So if it takes you 15 minutes to update the image and 30 seconds to snapshot it, you're done. You got a base image. Then you go back to View Manager and you say, okay, I need to update this pool. And you go in and you run through a little wizard and it says, what do you want to update? And you can choose to update the pool or you can choose to update individual users in the pool. right? And so if you've got this patch and your mechanism is I've got a targeted group of 25 users out of the 300 in the pool, I'm going to update that 25 users. I'm going to run a pilot with them for 2 weeks, and if it's good, I'm going to go back and do the rest of the pool. Whatever it is, it's just clicking like literally 3 screens, and then you say force the user to log off or let them log off on their own, and whatever method you choose as an administrator, that image gets updated the next time that machine gets shut down and rebooted, and that patch has been rolled out. No more worrying about did the patch go out, did it apply successfully, did it trash something, right? Because, if it did trash something, then you go back to View Manager and you say, no, go back to the previous snapshot and force everybody to log off, and when they log back in, they're going to be running last week's patch Tuesday instead of this week's. So cost effective, again, this is a tough one. So cost effectiveness really comes down to a discussion about CapEx versus OpEx. And a few years ago, right? So I said my first VMworld was 2008. We were CapEx challenged, but as you heard the announcement this week, we've been working aggressively to drive down the cost of what it takes to put a machine in the data center. So the number that we have this year is $252, which is down 70% from last year, because last year we were excited to get below I think it was $750 or $800. And we've done that through massive improvements in scalability with the new set of, the new next generation of Intel processors, as well as some of the storage cost reductions that come from tiered storage and advances by partners like EMC and NetApp and Dell and HP and all of these vendors that are now starting to realize, hey, we've got to figure out a way to tune these components for desktop virtualization. So for $250 all in, you can get the storage, the networking, and the compute you need to run a virtual desktop. Right, so we believe that we've got that down. We also believe that we have the best user licensing model for desktop virtualization. We license all of our SKUs on concurrent user. And what does that mean to you? That means if you live in an environment where you run shifts or you run international and not everybody's logged in at the same time, you only need to buy licenses for the maximum number of users that are concurrently connected. So in an environment that has 10,000 users and 5,000 of them are in the US and the other 5,000 are spread out in Europe and Asia, and so 5,000 people are working when 5,000 people are sleeping, you need 5,000 licenses. Other vendors do offer concurrent user licensing, but only at the lowest level of their stack. Their higher level products with the fully functional ones require either a license for every device in your environment or a license for every user that could potentially ever access the system. So in our example, that'd be 10,000 users, or if you figure that the average, it's usually about 1.5 devices per user, you'd need 15,000 licenses to cover all the devices at 1.5 devices per user. On the TCO story, we've done a lot of work with IDC last year to put together a TCO ROI study. And whether or not these numbers apply to you, I don't know. I mean, someone like Chris Wolf would walk in here and he would just giggle, right? And other people would walk in here and say, yeah, we've achieved something close to that. It just depends on your environment and how bad the problems were you were trying to solve. You can read the paper, you can look at where the cost savings came from, and you can make your own decision about how whether or not these numbers would apply to you. At the end of the day, though, you can read the IDC white paper. It's up on our website, and it's available for you to peruse and download as you see fit. So one last slide here, and this is basically, there's a report. If you want to understand where these numbers came from, you can read this report here at the bottom from EMA, and it basically went through, and we took, and again, using some of that server sizing data I took, looking at the licensing costs that I mentioned, and again, MSRPs, street licensing, as well as recommendations from both vendors. So we took a reference architecture that Citrix had published, we took a reference architecture we published, and provided those to EMA. They reviewed them, and they came up with these numbers. So what happens if you run XenDesktop on not Hyper-V? If you run it on Hyper-V, then I think these numbers even get better for us. But if you run it on vSphere, then okay, so maybe the server number shrinks. But do we still have an advantage in licensing? Potentially, depending on what version of the product you're buying and how much concurrency you have. Right? If you do full clones and you do flex cloning, well, that maybe changes the storage number. But if you're on our platform versus theirs, then maybe that we still have advantage in these other areas, right? The fact of the matter is we believe that across the board, because of our architecture and our pricing and our licensing, that we're going to be able to save you money. Right? It doesn't account for what either vendor will do behind closed doors. All of this is based on MSRP. You can read the white paper again and understand how the numbers were computed and whether or not it fits into your environment. I'm not going to presume that this represents the average environment or anything like that. I'm just saying in this case that the paper's built on, this is the way the numbers came out. So they told me to leave 10 minutes for questions, and I've left 10 and a half. So I can tell you a joke. at the expense of Ken. What does a VMware and a Citrix sales call have in common? They both spend a lot of time talking about VMware. Okay. All right. So with that, we have Q&A. If you'd like to ask questions, feel free. If you're going to exit, please do so quietly. If there's no questions, then thank you very much. Enjoy your last session, and we'll see you next year. Any questions? If not, okay. I got one here and one back here. So let's go up here first. Okay. Yeah, so the gentleman said, this morning in the super session, we spent a lot of time talking about mobile devices, like Android, BlackBerry, iPad, iPhone. That's the next generation of device connectivity for us. So it's not something we have today that we're talking about, but we're working on developing, we have our iPad client, we've been showing it on the show floor in the VMware Express. Same thing, we have an Android client running as well now in the same mode. So we're working on those. Those clients, to quote Vittorio, those clients will be out soon. They're coming, and we're gonna get them out for you. But I unfortunately can't give you any more detail than that. If I had more detail, I would share it because I don't really care about NDAs. The gentleman back there.
So slide 21 you talked about.
Oh, look at this, slide 21.
Slides you talked about the server management. I'm wondering what you're recommending these days now that RTO is not in the queue for all the time.
Yeah, so unfortunately, we were not able to ship RTO with the release. We made a decision that we weren't going to ship a product that didn't meet our quality bars, and we made a really tough decision. So what do we recommend? There's a lot of vendors out there. So in the product, we still do have user data disks. They're not as robust as full profile virtualization. But there's a lot of vendors out there that are doing profile virtualization, and I think the show floor may still be open a little bit, but if not, you can look at companies like RES, you can look at AppSense, you can look at Liquidware Labs, for instance. Other questions? Right here. Yeah, not in this version. So the gentleman's question was, what do we, can we make an image portable? And I had somebody come up and explain this to me yesterday. They said, I'd really like to just be able to take that base image, and rather than have to download it, I want to send them a USB key and have a way to do an import on that. It's not something that's in View 4.5, but it's definitely feedback that we've heard repeatedly. So I can't promise you, but I think that it's a use case we're looking at to sort of make that initial load of the virtual machine more efficient and more, resilient to low speed networks or disconnected users. I'm going to go here in the white and then go behind him.
In every case, every deployment we've had except for one, we've had bandwidth issues, meaning we've had to get the client more bandwidth. And it's been a bit of an issue. Are we missing something? Are we not managing the settings for PCOIP or whatever? Is that just...
Well, what you
experience here, we need to consider that.
Okay, yeah. So the gentleman said, every time he's done a deployment, he's had to up the user's bandwidth because of they wanted to increase the user experience and they weren't able to.
And almost every case they're coming from Citrix or some other type of remote access.
Okay. Yeah. So what you probably missed was our joint announcement with Verizon this week. Obviously, we make money on that bandwidth when you up it, so we get a little kickback. No, I mean, in all seriousness, we have not done. Because my group is responsible for the technical documentation that comes out, the white papers and stuff, I will fall on the sword and say, we have not done a good job of providing prescriptive guidance to our partners and our customers on how do you fine-tune PC over IP, right? And so we're working on that. We have had customers who have gone in, again, there's the GPO policies, and I don't know if you've worked with those or not, if you were even aware of those. But that's one of the things. The other thing is to understand how users use bandwidth and where it makes sense. I'm not going to sit here and say that we are going to use less bandwidth than Citrix, right? I will tell you that we're probably not 10x, which is a number that I've heard thrown around. I mean, there may be cases, but on the whole, on the average, that's probably not the case. But yeah, I think there are things you can do with PC over IP. We just did publish some white papers on tuning and optimizing, and we're going to continue to do that, and we're going to continue to work on it. So, you can come up and get a card from me, and I can help you get that information.
Question about the apps. It depends on how your desktop image is created. Can you run local mode on the thin app?
Yeah, so the gentleman said, can you run thin apps in local mode? And the answer is absolutely. There's two ways you can do thin apps, right? ThinApp is not a presentation technology, right? The execution occurs inside either the VM or inside the physical PC. But you can stream them over the network, right? So we'll sort of fire the app up, we'll get enough to get it going, and we'll just start running the app, and we'll stream it in as we need it. Or you can just copy the application down. So with View 4.5, with the ThinApp stuff here that we were talking about, you can choose to either stream or you can do locally installed. So for people that are in local mode, you would locally install those ThinApps.
Replicate it out. Some other technologies that have those local, SID shares. Do you have local SID share in apps?
Well, you can locate your repository wherever you want to do it, right? So, and you can use something like DFS if you need to, and you need to have multiple repositories. But the deployment actually happens when the pool is created. So if you go into a pool and you say, I want to put the ThinApps in this pool, when we create the pool, we're going to throw those applications in the pool for you on those desktops. All right, other questions? Anyone? Bueller? All right, thank you very much for sticking around. Enjoy the rest of the show.